Hello, my name is Helena. I only went in for a routine appendix surgery. Nothing dramatic, nothing complicated, or so I thought. But when I woke up, the nurse leaned in close and whispered, "Did they tell you about the second procedure?" They hadn't, because my mother and sister had already decided for me that I didn't deserve the right to choose whether I could ever have children. They called it protection, but it felt like betrayal wrapped in a hug. Now I'm wondering, if they were willing to steal my body without asking, what else did they take? And why didn't I see it coming? It wasn't the pain that woke me. It was the silence, the kind of quiet you don't expect in a hospital. No beeping machines, no distant footsteps, no nurses exchanging clipped morning instructions. Just stillness, like someone had pressed pause on the entire floor. I blinked against the dim lights above me. My throat burned, dry and scratchy. The world came back in fragments, ceiling tiles, the hum of fluorescent lighting, the faint chill of air conditioning licking my skin. Then the pain crept in, not sharp and localized like I'd imagined it would be, where they told me my appendix would have been, but lower, deeper, a slow, aching soreness in my pelvic area. I shifted, wincing. Something was wrong. A young nurse was adjusting my IV line. She was petite, maybe mid-20s, with thick braids pulled back into a ponytail and tired eyes that darted toward the hallway too often. When she noticed me stirring, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "There you are," she said softly. "How are you feeling, Helena?" "Sore," I managed to rasp, trying to sit up. She gently pressed my shoulder. "Take it easy. You're fresh out of surgery. Just some fluids for now." What time is it?" "Just past 9 a.m. You've been in recovery for about an hour." I squinted, trying to remember how I got here. The last clear memory I had was the mask coming down over my face, the anesthesiologist telling me to count backward. I'd only gotten to 7. And now I was here, with this unfamiliar ache, like something deeper had been disturbed. "I thought it was just an appendectomy," I murmured, trying to ignore the heavy pull in my abdomen. The nurse didn't answer immediately. Her fingers paused mid-adjustment on the IV pump. She glanced at the door again, then quickly pulled the curtain around my bed, creating a flimsy veil of privacy. Her voice dropped low. "Didn't they tell you about the second procedure?" My pulse kicked up. "What second procedure?" But she'd already stepped back, her eyes darting again to the hallway. "Dr. Anders will be by soon," she said quickly. I'll get you more water." Before I could push further, she slipped out. The moment she left, the stillness became oppressive. Second procedure. That's not how this was supposed to go. The whole thing had been explained to me. Simple laparoscopic surgery, overnight recovery, home by morning. I swallowed hard, heart thudding. A second procedure? My mind raced. My body screamed that something had changed. I ran my fingers gently over the thin hospital gown, over the blanket, and down to my lower abdomen. There was more than one dressing. I froze. 2 incisions. Why 2? Just then, I heard heels clicking against the linoleum. The curtain rustled, and my mother's face appeared, followed closely by my sister Isolde. Both wore the kind of tight-lipped smiles people use at funerals. "Hi, sweetheart," my mother said in that overly rehearsed tone I'd heard too many times in my life. "You're awake. Thank God." Isolde stepped in beside her, arms folded, gaze sweeping the room like she was surveying a boardroom. "How are you feeling?" I stared at them, unsure what to say. "What happened? Why does it hurt down there?" The nurse said something about a second procedure. They exchanged a look. Then came the line that would split my world in two. "We did it to protect you," my mother said, her voice too calm. "Protect me from what?" I tried to sit up, but my body ached with resistance. Isolde chimed in, tone clipped, practical. "You've always struggled with anxiety, Helena. You said you wanted children, but we both know you weren't ready. Not really." My mouth went dry. "What are you talking about?" "We gave the doctor's consent to proceed with a tubal ligation," my mother said. "It was the right time. You were already under." My brain froze. I stared at her, then at my sister. What?" "You've been spiraling," Isolde continued. "You canceled therapy last month. You've been withdrawing socially. The idea of you raising a child right now? It would have destroyed you. My mother nodded. This way, you're safe. You'll thank us one day. I couldn't speak. My hands trembled under the blanket. My chest tightened, but it wasn't panic. It was something colder, something sharp. You sterilized me, I whispered, without my consent. They didn't flinch. My mother stepped forward, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear like I was 10 years old again. We made a hard choice so you wouldn't have to. You didn't make a choice, I snapped, finding my voice despite the fog. You took mine, Isolde clicked her tongue. We're your family, Helena. Sometimes love means stepping in when someone can't make the right decision themselves. I wanted to scream. Instead, I turned my face to the wall. I want you both to leave. Sweetheart, now. There was a pause, long and heavy. Then the quiet shuffle of heels retreating, the rustle of the curtain, and the suffocating silence returned. It didn't matter that my body was still weak, or that the anesthesia hadn't fully worn off. I felt awake in a way I hadn't been in years. The nurse's whisper had opened a door, and behind it wasn't just a second procedure, it was the truth, and they'd buried it under the word love. I didn't sleep the night I was discharged. The sheets smelled like bleach. The room buzzed with a kind of silence that reminded me of the recovery unit, but the ache in my abdomen was now outmatched by something else. A need, a pull toward truth. 3 days later, I sat on my couch in sweats, my laptop warming my thighs as the rain tapped against the windows. I hadn't told anyone I was back yet. Not even Julie, my best friend. I needed space, to breathe, to think, to pull the threads of what had just happened. That morning, I'd called the billing department at Riverside Medical Center, asking, politely, if they could send a full breakdown of all charges tied to my patient ID. They said it would take 2 to 3 days, but I insisted it was urgent. I made up something about a possible insurance fraud case. The woman on the phone lowered her voice when I mentioned fraud. People respond to words like that. While waiting for the documents, I thought about everything I could trace. Insurance? Sure. Paperwork. And then it hit me. Our family's emergency fund. Years ago, my mother had added me as a secondary on a shared checking account. She used it for family emergencies, but since I rarely looked at it and never touched the funds, I figured it had sat dormant. I opened the banking app and logged in. It took less than a minute to scroll back to the week of my surgery. There it was. Medical Consulting LLC, $12,500. Dated exactly 1 day before my surgery. My stomach turned, not from the healing incisions, but from something worse. This was a transaction, a service. And the price tag told me it wasn't for a routine consultation. I stared at the payment for what felt like forever. There was no description beyond the payee, just a large withdrawal from my mother's personal account into the name of a private practice that didn't even show up when I Googled it. Eventually, I slammed the laptop shut. The ache that had started in my abdomen now had a twin in my chest, and both were whispering the same thing. This wasn't an accident. Later that day, I dressed and drove to my mother's house. I didn't call ahead. I didn't need time for her to craft an answer. I wanted whatever reaction she gave me to be unscripted. She lived in the same house I grew up in, nestled in a quiet, moneyed corner of Eastmoreland. The same neat hedges, the same red door, the same black shutters that always needed painting but never got it. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, but only for a second. "Oh," she said. "You're here. You look, well." I stepped inside, brushing past her. "I need to talk." She followed me into the living room where the fire was already going. Not for heat, it was spring, but because appearances mattered. I didn't sit. "I looked into the insurance," I started, voice steady. "Then I checked the joint account." She said nothing, but the air in the room thickened. "Did you pay Dr. Marlowe to perform the second procedure?" I asked flatly. She sighed. Not the guilty kind, the exasperated kind, like I'd just brought up politics at Thanksgiving. "Some women," she began, taking her seat by the fire, crossing one leg over the other, "aren't meant to be mothers, Helena." My body tensed, but I kept my arms folded. "So you took that decision from me?" "I protected you from a path you weren't built for," she said, like it was fact. I shook my head. You don't get to make that call. You're not God. She leaned back, folding her hands over her knee. You've been unraveling for years. The constant doubts, the isolation. You would have ruined a child, Helena. You would have ruined yourself. I stared at her, heart hammering, jaw clenched. She added, almost gently, and you would have hated me for not stepping in. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just said, I already do. I turned to leave. But before I reached the door, she called after me. I did what I wish someone had done for me, she said. And one day, you'll see that. As I pulled the door open, I spotted her at the base of the stairs. Isolde, leaning against the banister, arms crossed, wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my rent. We locked eyes. She didn't look surprised. She didn't even pretend. Instead, she smiled, a small, satisfied thing, like a cat watching a mouse discover the trap had already been set. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, it was clearer than anything else. She'd known. She'd probably orchestrated it. And now, she was watching me break, slowly, the way she always had. I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting. I turned back to the door, stepped into the drizzle, and pulled it shut behind me. Back in my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel, I whispered out loud, just to hear it said, They took my body. Then louder, I will take back the truth. I didn't drive home that night. I didn't trust myself behind the wheel, not with that kind of rage swimming just under the surface. Instead, I parked in a dim corner of the hospital garage, rolled my seat back, and sat in silence while the engine cooled. The next morning, Portland was still draped in gray, the kind of weather that makes you question if the sun will ever show up again. I stopped for coffee on the way home, extra strong, black, no sugar. No sweetness belonged in my mouth after what I'd swallowed in that house. Back in my apartment, I peeled off my coat, let my keys clatter onto the entry table, and dropped onto the couch. My laptop was still open from 2 days ago, half asleep like me. I tapped the trackpad, and the screen blinked to life, welcoming me with the medical billing records I'd requested. The total charges looked mostly what I expected, until I scrolled past the procedural line items. One caught my eye. Bilateral salpingectomy. CPT code 58700. Physician, Dr. Michael Marlowe. Reason, risk mitigation, hereditary concerns, family request. There it was, in neat clinical print, no mention of my consent, no digital signature, just those words, hereditary concerns. I clicked open another tab, logged into my old OBGYN portal. The records were still there, stored like digital time capsules of past visits. PAP results, yearly checkups, notes about normal hormone panels, even a note about me discussing future fertility goals. Nowhere, not once. Did any doctor flag me as infertile or at risk? I opened a blank document and began copying text from both systems, mine and theirs, comparing phrases, dates, diagnoses. It didn't add up. Why would they label me naturally infertile? Who said that? Based on what? And then I remembered. A voice, sharp, cold, echoing from years ago. I was maybe 14. I had just come home from my first school dance, cheeks flushed, still smiling when I kicked off my shoes at the door. My mom had been waiting, standing with her arms crossed. "You're not wearing that again," she snapped. I remember laughing, thinking she was joking. "It's just a dress." She took a step forward, her voice rising. "I gave birth to you, Helena. That body is mine until you prove you can be trusted with it." At the time, I thought it was just another meltdown, a mom moment, a power trip during a bad week. But now, years later, those words had weight. She hadn't been joking. That wasn't frustration. That was prophecy. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. My mother had been rehearsing this control for decades. She didn't just doubt me. She laid the foundation for my silence years before I ever knew what autonomy meant. And now, they had rewritten my medical identity to match the story they had always told themselves. I stood up, pacing my small living room. Each step felt heavier. Not from pain, but purpose. I wasn't going to just stew in this. I needed records. Facts. Proof. I grabbed my phone and called Riverside again, this time asking to speak directly with medical records. "I'm requesting my full patient file," I said clearly. "Everything, history, notes, communications. I'll pick it up in person." The woman hesitated but agreed. "It may take 2 business days. I'll be there Friday morning." When I ended the call, I dropped into my chair and opened the voice memo app on my phone. Hit record. "My name is Helena Morrison. Date, April 12th. This is entry 1. I paused, then kept going. I was sterilized without consent. My mother paid for it. My sister signed off. The medical team listed me as naturally infertile despite no history to support that claim. This is the beginning of my documentation. I saved it, then played it back just to hear it in someone else's voice, even if it was mine. The tremble in my tone was almost imperceptible. By Friday morning, I was at Riverside by 8:45, coffee in hand, coat zipped high. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and tired hope. I gave my ID to the receptionist, waited 10 minutes, then received a manila envelope thick with printouts. I didn't open it until I got home. I needed to read every word without surveillance or performance. Sitting at my kitchen table, I unfolded the first document. Page 1. Intake summary. Page 2. Surgical report. Page 3. Patient history. Infertility suspected. Family history, maternal. Discussed with patient's family representative. Recommendation, proceed with bilateral salpingectomy, concurrent with appendectomy. Underneath that was a scribbled signature. M. Marlowe, MD. My stomach flipped. Family representative, not patient. There was no signature line for me. No checkbox for consent. They had bypassed me completely, using emotional distress as their justification. A note at the bottom read, "Patient experiences clinical anxiety regarding reproduction. Family recommends surgical consolidation to avoid future distress." Clinical anxiety. I wasn't clinically diagnosed with anything, ever. I didn't even see a therapist regularly, just an occasional telehealth check-in when work got overwhelming. And I had never once claimed to be afraid of pregnancy. In fact, just a month ago, I'd been reading articles about freezing my eggs. I had even bookmarked a clinic. I opened my browser and checked. Yes, still saved. They had rewritten my future in permanent ink. That night, as rain pattered on the windows and my heating system kicked in with a low hum, I sat at my desk with all the papers spread before me. I scanned each one into a folder I labeled counter-narrative. Then I opened a new document and began writing. It started with one line. They used fear to take away my choice. I'll use truth to take away their power. If they needed me silent, they should have finished the job. The thought hit me as I sat on the edge of my bed that evening, laptop open, fingers hovering above the keys. I hadn't slept much since receiving my medical records, but exhaustion was no longer the thing slowing me down. What I felt now was sharper than fatigue, calculated, surgical, like I'd entered the operating room of my own war. I'd been digging into Isolde's work drive all afternoon. Years ago, we shared a cloud system when we collaborated on a charity project. She never revoked my access. My gut told me it was either arrogance or an oversight. With Isolde, it could be both. Folders labeled media assets, events Q3, board decks scrolled past. Then one caught my attention. For risk prevention. I clicked. Inside were video clips, transcripts, and documents, most relating to board member PR issues, but one file was named HM Clip V1.MP4. My stomach dropped. I played it. On screen, I was seated in the break room at my old job, coffee in hand, laughing with a coworker named Dana. The audio was crisp, too crisp, like someone had placed a mic near the coffee maker just to catch clean sound. And then I heard it. "I can't imagine being a mother," I said, smiling. "It terrifies me." The video cut abruptly. End of clip. But I remembered that day. I wasn't talking about myself. I was editing a thriller novel about a woman who panicked during childbirth, and we were joking about the intensity of the scene. I even remember saying, "This character is so messed up, I can't imagine being in her shoes." But in this clip, the sentence had been trimmed, all context deleted. It looked damning. Worse, it looked like a confession. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. She'd kept this, stored it like a weapon, a preloaded narrative, something she could pull out if I ever questioned her version of reality. I closed the laptop slowly and stood, staring out the window. Portland's skyline was coated in dusk, buildings silhouetted in the orange-pink glow of a dying day. Below, the street lamps began flickering on, one by one, like they knew night was coming, whether we wanted it or not. By 7:30 p.m., I was behind the wheel, headed downtown. The law office of Harlan Chase was tucked into a historic building with ivy-covered brick and a polished brass sign that looked like it hadn't been touched since 1997. I hadn't called ahead. I didn't want to give anyone time to prepare. The receptionist looked up as I stepped in. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Mr. Chase. It's regarding my father's estate. I'm Helena Morrison." Something shifted in her expression. She buzzed him immediately. Harlan met me in the hall, older than I remembered, but not by much. He still had that same quiet intensity, like he was always thinking 3 steps ahead. "Helena," he said, nodding. "Come on back." We walked into his office, which smelled like old wood and printer toner. I didn't sit. "I need to see the original copy of my father's will," I said. Harlan blinked. "That's a bit unusual." "So is being sterilized without my consent," I replied evenly. And yet, here we are. He didn't argue. Instead, he opened a filing cabinet, pulled out a red folder, and handed me a manila envelope. "This was the draft filed before your father passed. I wasn't informed of any revision until after the funeral." I opened it carefully. My name was at the top, listed as the primary beneficiary. No clauses, no conditions. Then Harlan reached for another file. This is the one Isolde submitted 3 weeks later. "Claimed your father wanted to update it verbally before passing." I pulled out the second will. The clause was clear. "Should Helena bear biological children, her share of the estate shall be held in trust and managed solely by Isolde M. Rutherford." I froze. There it was. The why. The motive behind the sterilization. The legal incentive. It wasn't just about protecting me from myself. It was about control, inheritance, power. I set the papers down and looked Harlan in the eye. "You knew." His lips pressed into a thin line. "I suspected, but I couldn't prove anything." "You still can't," I said, "but I can." Back at my apartment, I didn't speak. I didn't scream. I moved with intention. I placed the fake video file into a flash drive and tossed it into the fireplace. I watched it melt, warp, and disappear. The will, though, that I kept. I scanned it, stored it, backed it up 3 times. Once on a private cloud, once on an encrypted drive, and once in a hidden folder named Case Reconstruction, Truth Only. Then I sat down at my desk, opened a blank document, and wrote the title. Phase 1, Erasure. I didn't feel rage anymore, just focus. Let them think I was weak. Let them believe I was done. That was always their mistake. I didn't even hear the knock at first. I was halfway through reviewing a medical consent statute on my laptop, one I'd reread 3 times already. The words were starting to blur when a second knock, sharper, more deliberate, pulled me out of my head. I walked to the door, cautiously. On the other side stood a woman with an ID badge clipped to her coat, mid-40s, business casual, holding a small leather-bound notebook. Her expression tried to be pleasant, but there was something stiff in the corners of her smile. "Helena Morrison?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm Claire Monroe. I work with family services for the county." She shifted slightly. Do you mind if I come in for a moment?" That sentence, "Do you mind if I come in?" used to mean nothing, a formality. But that morning, it felt like the beginning of another invasion. I nodded, letting her step inside. She didn't take off her coat. "I want to start by saying this isn't punitive," she began, her tone rehearsed. "We received a concern about your well-being, emotional, post-surgery." I tilted my head, slowly closing the door. "A concern? From whom?" "I'm not permitted to disclose the original source, but the report raised some questions about stability. I let out a slow breath, walked past her to the living room. She followed. I gestured toward the chair, but didn't sit. She opened her notebook. There's a psychological assessment on file, dated last week. It suggests patterns of paranoia, obsessive thinking, and some emotional volatility. It also mentions fixation on reproductive trauma. I raised my eyebrows. It also mentions a diagnosis? She hesitated. It lists behaviors, not formal diagnoses. Yet. Yet, I repeated, nodding. So, someone filed a report saying I'm unstable based on behaviors that no licensed therapist has observed. That about right? Claire blinked, caught between protocol and common sense. Ms. Morrison, she said, softer now, this doesn't mean anyone's assuming guilt or truth, but when there's a formal document in the system, I'm required to follow up. That's all this is. No, it's not, I said. This is a paper trail. It's step one in a coordinated attempt to discredit me before I speak out. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a folder off the counter, and handed it to her. Those are my therapy summaries from the last 3 years. No diagnosis, no crisis, no pattern of paranoia. My biggest issue was overworking myself during editorial deadlines. So unless someone's lying about my mental health, I looked her dead in the eye, or fabricating it completely, then I'd like to know who's making these statements. Claire took the folder reluctantly. If this goes further, you'll be given opportunity to provide your full side. I forced a smile. Here's hoping. She left 10 minutes later. No threats, no accusations. Just vague caution dressed up in empathy. I locked the door behind her and leaned against it. They were escalating. This wasn't about stopping me anymore. It was about making sure no one believed me if I dared speak. That afternoon, I dug into the report. The only name listed as a contributor was Dr. Charles Bennett, a psychiatrist I'd never heard of. I searched the state board site. Licensed, Midtown office, and, of course, listed as a consultant for multiple family law attorneys, including one who'd worked with my sister. I called his office. His receptionist was polite. When I asked if Dr. Bennett had ever met with me in person, she said she couldn't discuss patient information without authorization. I'm not a patient, I said. That's the problem. She paused. Let me have someone call you back. I didn't wait. I sent a certified letter that afternoon, formally requesting any records attributed to me under Oregon's patient rights laws. Then I printed another copy and hand-delivered it. By evening, I was emotionally threadbare. The sun had dipped beneath the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with the kind of purples and oranges that feel like a lie. Too beautiful for days like this. I hadn't eaten since morning, but food was the last thing on my mind. A text came through just after 6 p.m. From Vera. Brunch Sunday. No excuses. We need to clear the air. I stared at it. Clear the air. Like this was a sibling spat about a birthday card. I didn't respond. I didn't plan to go. But Sunday morning, I found myself standing outside their country club's private dining room anyway. Not for reconciliation. For confirmation. I wanted to see the truth behind their eyes when they finally realized I wasn't backing down. The hostess opened the double doors. Inside, a long table was set with polished silverware and white linens. Vera sat at the head, already sipping from her coffee. Isolde sat to her right, scrolling her phone without looking up. Neither of them stood. I took my seat without a word. Vera smiled. You look well, Helena. I said nothing. Isolde finally looked up. I assume this means you've come to your senses. I looked between them, calm, not cold. I came, I said, to make something very clear. They both watched me like I was a mildly interesting crossword clue. I know what you've done, not just to my body, but to my name, my credibility. You've planted false records. You've weaponized psychiatrists. You're hoping to frame my pain as instability. Isolde tilted her head. Oh, Helena, you've always had such a dramatic streak. I didn't flinch. I may not be able to carry a child anymore, but I am not your child anymore either. Vera's smile faltered. I stood slowly, folding my napkin with deliberate precision. You thought you could erase me, I said. But now I'm the one holding the pen. I walked out without waiting for a reply. My heels clicked down the marble hallway like punctuation. This time, I didn't look back. If they wanted a war, I was done bringing paper to a knife fight. It had been 6 days since the brunch, 6 days since I told my mother and sister to their faces that I wasn't theirs to manage anymore. Since then, I had stopped explaining myself. I wasn't trying to be heard. I was building a record. I kept my movements quiet. Online, I scrubbed my accounts, adjusted every privacy setting I could find. I turned off location tracking on my phone. I even switched to cash for most of my errands. It wasn't paranoia, it was prep work. You don't walk into battle carrying a flashing beacon. On Friday afternoon, I stepped out of the car and walked into the downtown event hall where Isolde's Foundation was holding its annual gala. I was dressed in deep navy, hair pulled back tight, heels that clicked softly across polished concrete. I held the invite in one hand, a smile in the other. No one suspected a thing. I hadn't spoken to Isolde in person since the brunch. But the moment she saw me across the reception area, her expression flickered, just enough to confirm she hadn't expected this. She approached, champagne flute in hand. "You came," she said, that brittle charm coating her voice. "I thought about our talk," I replied evenly. "I figured maybe I needed to show you I'm not just angry, I'm invested." She nodded slowly, sipping her drink. "Good, I was hoping you'd come around." We didn't hug. I let her lead me through the room like a trophy she was about to display. Donors, trustees, city officials. They all shook my hand, smiled like they knew me. None of them had the slightest idea who I was beneath the tailored dress. Near the bar, I stepped aside, as if needing a refill. I pulled a small recording device from the inside pocket of my clutch and slipped it under the linen tablecloth near the refreshments. The bartender was too busy garnishing cocktails to notice. I'd scouted the spot earlier that day during setup. I'd volunteered to help through a friend of Isolde's assistant. That friend had no clue I'd used a fake name. Less than 20 minutes later, I watched as Isolde drifted over to the drink table, joined by none other than Dr. Michael Marlowe. He looked relaxed, his tux slightly wrinkled, his eyes glossy from wine. They exchanged pleasantries. Then their conversation turned quieter, more casual, just close enough to the recorder. And then it happened. Isolde leaned in, laughing softly. Honestly, she was never meant to be a mother. This way, I protected our family's legacy. You know that. Marlowe nodded. It was a clean procedure, no complications. You said she'd forget it ever happened. Of course she wouldn't forget, Isolde said. But she'd get over it. She always does, eventually. I slipped away, unnoticed, grabbing the recorder later during the dessert service. No one checked my bag on the way out. That night, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove to the family estate, an excuse prearranged with Vera to pick up a few of Dad's old books. She'd left a key under the planter on the porch, just like always. The house was empty. I went straight to Isolde's office. She always locked her files, but she never changed her digital habits. Her password hadn't changed since her grad school days, her middle name and birth year. I typed it in. Access granted. There, buried 3 folders deep, was a document titled No Air Scenario. I opened it, spreadsheets, legal memos, risk projections, all surrounding one scenario, if I never had children. One slide was titled Estate Consolidation Pathway. Another mapped out timelines for transferring ownership of our father's trust entirely into Isolde's educational fund. A line near the bottom froze me. If Helena has no offspring, consolidate estate into Isolde's trust by Q4. Legal challenge unlikely. See psychological assessment file. They weren't just trying to discredit me, they were planning to erase me. Methodically, surgically, like my own sterilization was just step 1 on a project plan. I downloaded everything to a secure flash drive, labeled it Proof Phase 1, slipped it into my coat pocket, and left the house the same way I came in. The next morning, I laid everything out on my dining table, the flash drive, the recorder, the notarized timelines, copies of the forged will, the doctored psychiatric report, the fake medical notes. No more wondering, no more hoping someone would admit what they'd done. This was a pattern, a system, and I had enough to break it wide open. I didn't feel relief, I didn't feel angry, I felt focused. That afternoon, I booked a consultation with attorney Sarah Chun, recommended by Julie's friend, a woman who'd gone through something eerily similar. I uploaded everything to a locked cloud folder and made copies stored in 2 different places, one at my apartment, one with a former coworker I trusted. Before I shut my laptop, I opened a fresh document. Title: Timeline of Intent. Under it, I wrote the first line: "You wanted a future without me. Let's make it official." The next morning, I sent the clip, not to a lawyer, not to the court, not to some friend waiting for validation. I sent it to myself, twice. Once to my personal email, once to a private, encrypted drive labeled simply, "Contingency." That's when I knew I had crossed a line. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was archiving. I wasn't trying to prove I was right. I was preparing for a battlefield where truth might be the only weapon I had left. The knock at my door came around 10:30 that morning. Not a stranger this time. A name from a life I thought I'd buried long ago. Silas. I hadn't seen him in years. He looked the same in that maddening way some people do. Older only around the eyes, dressed well, posture too controlled to feel natural. We met during the time in my life when I still thought if I worked hard enough, love could be logical. Predictable. I let him inside without a word. We sat in my kitchen, at the table I used to imagine us sharing breakfast at, years ago when we were still planning things together. "I heard you're suing your family," he said, no preamble. "You always did love opening with headlines," I replied. He exhaled, looking down at his hands. "I owe you something." I didn't say a thing, just waited. Back then, when I pulled away, he paused. "It wasn't about you, not really." I raised an eyebrow. "Then what was it about?" "Your sister told me you were unstable, that you'd been diagnosed with borderline, that you'd had episodes, that if I stayed, I'd be dragged into something I couldn't fix." I leaned back in my chair. "She said that?" I asked, voice flat. "She had details, Helena, private ones, stuff about your high school years, about therapy, about things you told her in confidence. And you believed her." He didn't argue, didn't defend. "I didn't know what to believe," he finally said. I didn't want to be the guy who made things worse." "You already were," I said. "You just did it from a safe distance." He nodded once, eyes low. "I'm sorry, truly. I see now what she was doing. She didn't want anyone too close to you, anyone you might trust more than her." "She succeeded," I said, rising from the table. He didn't ask for forgiveness. That I could respect. By the time he left, my mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. That afternoon, I met Helena in the park near the hospital. We sat on opposite benches, our knees angled slightly toward each other. It was safer this way. No one would think we were talking about anything serious. Her eyes were tired, her posture drawn. "They moved me to a different facility," she said. "Said there were complaints, that my conduct was being informally reviewed." "Was there a complaint?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Anonymous. Said I was discussing private medical details with non-authorized individuals." I clenched my jaw. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a thermos, unscrewing the cap slowly. "They've been calling. From blocked numbers. Whispering things. Telling me I'm next." "I'm sorry," I said. "I never meant for this to touch you." Helena shook her head. "I'm not telling you this for pity. I'm telling you because I still want to testify." I blinked. "Even now?" She stared at the ducks gliding along the surface of the pond. "If I don't, they'll do this to someone else, and I couldn't live with that." There was a long silence between us. "Courage is quieter than fear," I said. She smiled, almost faintly. "That why you haven't screamed yet?" I smiled too. The next evening, I sat in my car outside my apartment with my laptop balanced on my knees. I uploaded the audio clip of Isolde and Marlowe. I blurred identifying details, redacted personal information, and stripped it of metadata. Then I wrote the email. Subject: Consent isn't optional. To editor at theobserverportland.com. Body. Please find attached a story you may want to look into. A woman was sterilized without her consent during a routine appendectomy. Her family planned it, her sister funded it, her doctor performed it, and now they're trying to call her crazy to keep her quiet. Don't let them. A friend of the truth attached were the audio file and the redacted form from my medical records. I hit send. The article dropped within 48 hours. The headline read, "Erased without consent, one woman's silent war." They didn't use my name, but they quoted the audio. They included enough of the medical report to show it had been altered. They didn't call it a scandal. They called it what it was, medical violence. It spread fast. Within a day, my inbox flooded with messages from other women, from journalists, from strangers thanking me. Some shared their own stories, partners who'd tampered with birth control, doctors who dismissed their pain, families who told them they weren't fit to be mothers. And suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. I was the face of a war they never thought would reach the light. And the light was here now. I didn't win. I survived. And now, I choose what comes next. That morning, I zipped up a plain black dress, no statement jewelry, no designer shoes, just a blazer that fit right and a pair of low heels I could walk in for hours if I had to. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a version of me I hadn't met before. Clear-eyed, level, finished with fear. Julie picked me up just before 8 a.m. Her presence grounded me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She knew better than to make this day about feelings. We pulled up to the courthouse, and Sarah Chun was already there waiting, folder under her arm, calm as ever. Her heels clicked with intent. That woman never walked like she was unsure of her footing, and this morning, I needed that energy more than anything. Inside the courtroom, the tension wasn't electric. It was heavy, like the air didn't want to move. Isolde sat at the defense table, cool and collected in a navy pantsuit. Vera was beside her, hair pulled back, looking years older than she had the last time I saw her. Marlowe sat slightly apart, flanked by his own attorney, his tie slightly askew, like it had been tied in a hurry. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steely eyes and a voice that didn't need amplification, took her seat. Her nameplate read, Han. Rebecca Morales. "This case," Sarah began, standing with no notes, "is about consent. Not just medical, but human. About what it means when the people closest to you, those who claim to love you, erase your autonomy and call it protection." She walked slowly, her voice measured. "It's about control, betrayal, and the weaponization of trust. And it's about justice, delayed, but not denied." I didn't look at Vera, or Isolde. I didn't need to. We started with the audio. The clip of Isolde and Marlowe at the gala played loud and clear across the courtroom. No one made a sound. Isolde didn't flinch when her voice came through the speakers saying, she was never meant to be a mother. Marlowe shifted in his seat, wiping at his temple with a napkin he'd pulled from his pocket. Then came the documents, the falsified psychiatric report, the altered medical files, the no-air scenario folder printed, bound, and highlighted. Marlowe's turn came quickly. The medical board representative sat behind the prosecution. When asked under oath if he had ever received written consent from me for the sterilization, Marlowe hesitated. "No," he finally said. "Did you have any verbal confirmation from Mrs. Morrison directly?" Sarah asked. He cleared his throat. "No." "Did you fabricate the medical justification?" "I was told." He started, then stopped. "By whom?" "Her sister," he said, barely audible. Sarah stepped back. No further questions. Later, during recess, I saw Marlowe's wife standing by the courtroom doors. She didn't speak. She didn't look at me. But when her husband passed her on the way out, she turned and walked away from him, down the hallway, out of the building, and into her own freedom. By the afternoon, the courtroom felt smaller, like the truth had pulled the walls in. Isolde took the stand. She was polished, unbothered, and confident until the moment Sarah pulled out the printed emails, correspondence between her and Dr. Bennett, the psychiatrist who drafted the fake mental health summary. In one email, Isolde wrote, "She's spiraling. I need something on file in case she sues, something that shows she was never stable to begin with." Isolde tried to claim it was taken out of context, but Judge Morales raised one brow and said, "Please don't insult this court's intelligence." When the verdict came down, it was quiet, the kind of quiet you feel in your bones. Dr. Marlowe, guilty of medical battery, breach of ethics, license revoked permanently, ordered to pay damages. He didn't speak. Just nodded once, like he'd been waiting for this moment and didn't know what to do now that it had come. Vera, 4 years with eligibility for release after 2. The court acknowledged her age and psychological entanglement with patriarchal family control, but didn't excuse her role. She cried, for herself, not for me. And Isolde, 8 years, no parole. She stood when the sentence was read. Didn't blink, didn't argue. I could tell she had expected worse. After the final gavel, the room didn't erupt. There were no cheers, no gasps, just the sound of my breath as I finally let it out. I turned to Sarah. "Can I go now?" She nodded. "You can." Outside, the Portland air was damp with late spring mist. I didn't stop walking until I reached the corner. Julie caught up to me, wrapped an arm around my shoulder, and for the first time in months, I let someone hold me without bracing for betrayal. We didn't talk much in the car. We didn't need to. That night, I lit a candle in my apartment, not for prayer, not for memory, just to mark the shift. Something had ended, and something else, something I hadn't planned for, was waiting in the quiet. When the headlines faded and the courtroom emptied and the public's outrage turned its attention elsewhere, as it always does, I packed up what little I still owned in Portland and drove west. No ceremony, no tearful goodbye. Just a car, a long road, and the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of potential. 3 months later, I was living in a cottage by the coast. Not the kind you see in postcards. Mine had chipped paint, stubborn windows, and a roof that moaned when the wind rolled in from the ocean. But it was mine, every creak and crack of it. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I woke up without flinching at the sound of my own thoughts. That morning, I sat at my desk, overlooking the water, a cup of lukewarm coffee beside me, and an open manuscript on the screen. I'd agreed to edit a memoir for a woman I met through an advocacy group. Her story was different than mine, but it carried the same roots, being told what to do with a body that wasn't theirs to manage. Halfway through revising a chapter titled "Permission to be Angry," my eyes landed on a framed photo tucked beside my monitor. It wasn't there for display, it was there for grounding. In it, I stood on a beach, wind-tossed and sun-kissed, beside a little girl with curly dark hair and a grin that didn't hide behind politeness. Her name was Lily, 8 years old, and 2 months into calling me Mom. The adoption process had been surprisingly fast, mostly because no one else had stayed committed long enough to see it through for her. But I did. From the moment I read her file, I knew. This wasn't about replacing anything, it was about choosing. And I had chosen her. A soft thud broke my train of thought. Lily had taped another drawing to the fridge, something abstract, but unmistakably us. I walked over and looked closer. 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, both with big hearts colored red. No sun, no sky, just us. I smiled, then opened the fridge to grab a bottle of water. That's when I noticed the envelope, a cream-colored envelope tucked beneath a magnet. No postmark, hand-delivered. I took it down and opened it slowly. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper in neat cursive. "Dear Aunt Helena, you're the only adult who never lied to me. I used to think you were weak. Mom said you were fragile, dramatic, selfish. But when I watched the news, when I heard what she did, I realized she wasn't strong. She was just mean. You were the brave one. Love, M." No return address, no request to write back. Just the clarity of a teenager who had lived too long in someone else's narrative. I folded the note and slid it next to Lily's newest drawing. That night, the wind picked up early. The kind of wind that makes the whole house hum like it remembers something it can't quite say aloud. Lily and I had made spaghetti, watched an old animated movie, and argued gently over whether she needed to brush her teeth again. "Your breath still smells like garlic," I told her. "That's just because you're too close," she replied, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Close enough to smell the truth," I teased. She giggled, then ran to her room. I followed her 10 minutes later. She was already in bed, her stuffed rabbit half off the pillow, her legs twisted in the sheets. I sat beside her, smoothing her hair back. "Did you really pick me?" she whispered. I nodded. "Every day." "But I didn't grow in your tummy." I smiled. "No, you didn't. You grew in my heart." She was quiet a moment, then murmured, "I'm glad I'm yours." I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Me too." After she fell asleep, I walked out to the porch with a blanket and sat facing the water. The stars were buried behind clouds, but the waves didn't need light to move. I pulled the blanket tighter and let my breath settle. So much had been taken from me. My body, my voice, my name, for a while. But not my future. That part I had built myself, brick by brick, choice by choice. I thought of all the women I had met since the trial, survivors, fighters, daughters, sisters. One of them once told me, "Redemption isn't about a grand moment, it's about staying when everything tells you to leave." She was right. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small seashell Lily had handed me that morning. It was imperfect, cracked on one side. But she'd said, "It's strong, even if it's broken." I held it up to the wind and whispered to no one, or maybe to all of them. They took my choice, but they didn't take my voice. And now, this voice raises another. Sometimes, the deepest wounds don't bleed. They're signed, notarized, and disguised as love. Helena's story isn't just about medical betrayal, it's about reclaiming the voice that others tried to erase. It's a reminder that control can wear a kind face, and that real strength often means standing alone. At first. Have you ever had someone make a life-changing decision for you without asking? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your voice. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories that dig deep into family, resilience, and what it means to take back your power.